Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmate. We are the group 3, and our topic for today is private banking institutions. Private banking is a service that includes investment, banking, and other financial services provided by banks to a very rich people and their families. The word private in the term refers to customer service that is delivered on a much more personal basis than in a mass market retail banking. In general terms, private banking involves financial institutions that provide financial management service to high net worth individuals. The first private banking institution is commercial banks. Commercial banks are the one who offers basic investment like savings account, current account, and other services to the individual and corporate. Commercial banks also offer to the general public a loans and deposits. The profit or interest that they earn, they use that as a fee for providing their facilities.
Commercial banks are classified into two categories: scheduled commercial banks and non-scheduled commercial banks. Scheduled commercial banks can take money from RBI or Reserve Bank of India, are further classified into three types, while non-scheduled banks are cannot take any money from RBI, or non-scheduled banks keep the cash reserve itself. The three types of scheduled banks are private banks, public banks, and foreign banks. Private banks, when the private individuals own more than 51% of the share capital, when that banking company is a private one. However, these banks are publicly listed companies in a recognized exchange. Private banks are banks owned by either the individual or general partners with a limited partners. Private banks are not incorporated. In such any case, creditor can look to both the entirety of bank's asset as well as of the sole proprietors or general partner's asset. The best example of the private banks are the private banks in the Philippines are the Philippine Veteran Banks or the BDO, while the public banks, when the government hold more than 51% of the share capital of a publicly listed banking company, when that bank is called a public sector's bank. Public bank, it is a financial institution which is state, municipality, or public actors are owned the enterprise under the government's control. The best example of these public banks in the Philippines are the land banks, which is the government use land banks to give money to the purpose beneficiaries, while the foreign banks banks set up in a foreign countries and operate their branches in the home country are called foreign banks. Foreign banks refers to the any United States operations of banking operations headquarters outside the country. Example of this is city banks, or we can also say the Bank of America. That
Good afternoon. My name is Alcontado Julie Mark, and I am here to report the function of commercial bank. When we say function, it is an activity or a purpose. So, what's the purpose of commercial bank? There are two functions of commercial bank. Number one is primary function, and number two is secondary function. Under primary function, accepting deposits and advancing loans. And under secondary function, agency services, general utility services, transfer of funds, and credit creation. Okay, let's proceed to the primary function of commercial bank. When we say primary function, it is a major activity or the basic activity or the most important activity that the bank do. And number one is the accepting deposits. Accepting deposits is the primary function for which commercial bank were established because it is to accept deposits from the general public. So where does the commercial bank get the deposits? It's from the people who have the surplus funds. And when we say surplus funds, are funds that excess in cash or other recognized assets that are expected to resolve into cash or its equivalent. There are various products offered by the bank to the customers in return for the deposit of their money. Number one is savings account. Number two is current deposit. Number three is fixed deposit. And number four is the recurring deposit.
Primary function, advancing loans. Next important function performed by commercial bank is lending money to the individuals and companies. The banks makes loan to the customers in the form of term loans, cash credit, overdraft, and discounting of bills of exchange. Advancing term loan is similar to other type of term loans, but with the advancing period in which the business only makes interest payment. Once the advancing period has passed, the loans become a typically term loan with predefined monthly principal interest payment due through the life of the loan. Cash credit is a short term offered by the self-employed customers and businesses to meet their working capital requirements. Overdraft is a credit funding offered by banks to individuals and companies to withdraw money from the bank in which they have accounts. Term loan is a monetary loan that is referred in regular payment over a set of period of time. Term loan usually lasts between 1 and 10 years but may last long as 30 years in some cases. Discounting of bills refers to the encashment of bills before the date of its maturity. The bank deducts its charges from the bills. The bank shall make the payment of the bills after deducting some interest, called discount of this case. This process of encashing the bill with the bank is called discounting of bills.
Secondary functions. Agency service, they are some facilities provided by the commercial banks in which they act as an agent of the customer. Such service are collection and payment of rent, interest, and dividend, collection and payment of cheques and bills, buying and selling securities, payment of insurance, premium, and subscription. Ang agency service ay tumutukoy sa general banks na nagpapakita ng magandang benepisyo para sa kanilang customers. And the following importance to agency service rendered by commercial banks. Kaya nagtitiwala ang mga tao sa commercial banks dahil pinapakita or nakikita ang mga proseso o ang mga benepisyo ng isang bangko. Kaya nahihikayat ang mga customers na mag-invest or magpasok ng pera sa kahit anumang commercial banks na including commercial banks. Secondary functions, general utility service. Commercial banks provide general utility service to the customers and charges a fee for the same. It covers service like safekeeping of valuables, documents, etc. in locker or vault, ATM card, credit card, debit card facilities, issue of demand draft, pay order, and traveler cheque, internet and mobile banking, sale of application form of competitive exam. General utilities ay bumubuo sa pangkalahatan hindi lamang sa kanilang customers, pati na rin sa government. At isa din ang general utilities is to involve to rendered by a commercial banks. Kita po natin kung paano mag-stabilize yung general utilities. For example, changing cash for bank deposit and bank deposit for cash, transferring bank deposit between individuals or companies, and provided 24 hours facilities of payment through ATM.
Secondary functions. Transfer of funds. Bank can assist in the transfer of funds from one person to another or from one place to another through its credits instrument. A bank teller can help you to set up many other transfer services, including wire transfer to another bank, state, or country. A bank can assist with many types of transfers. If we're simply transferring money from one account to another within the same financial institution, this is something you can easily do at your bank for free. The next one is credit creation. The commercial banks are authorized to create credit by granting more loans than the amounts deposited by the customer. A commercial bank is a dealer of credit. It creates money based on cash deposits. Further, it issues new money through its loan operation and creates credit or expand the monetary base on a country. Therefore, this process to credit creation leads depositors to believe that they have money with the bank. Also, borrowers believe that they owe a certain money to the bank. Some of the examples are Allied Bank, Metro Bank, BPI, and BDO.
Thrift banks. What is thrift banks? A thrift bank is also known as a savings and loan association. It is a form of a financial institution that provides basic banking services by offering a variety of savings options and mortgage loan services. And just like commercial banks, these two qualify as a depository institution and maybe provide a range of other products and services. Thrift banks was confined to offer time deposits and savings account. Still, with the change of customers' behavior, preferences, needs, and expectations, these banks started offering various types of product and services that are offered by the both commercial banking firms and credit unions. Thrift banks are primarily funded by consumers' deposit. They offer many of the same services as retail or commercial banks, including debit and credit cards and federally insured savings and checking accounts. It also focuses on the basic services for their clients with an emphasis on individual and small businesses. This core of services is built around the offering of home mortgage along with a savings account that carry a competitive rate of interest. Unlike retail or commercial banks, a thrift bank is normally thought of as a community development financial institution that is concerned with all providing the best financial services possible to individuals, as well as the small businesses that operates in the area. In terms of services offering, a thrift bank is capable of meeting all the usual needs of the individual customers. The savings account often comes with an interest rate that is competitive with the rates offered by the larger financial institution. Overall, a thrift banks operate similarly to traditional banks. They offer consumer accounts, including checking and savings, as well as debit and credit cards, certificate of deposit, and financial and auto loans. A thrift bank is either mutual, meaning it is owned by its depositors, or a corporation owned by investors.
Functions of thrift banks. These banks are the financial institutes that functions for the purpose of relieving the monopoly stress and offering their account holders with the facilities like saving accounts, mortgage loans, etc. The functions are to accept the deposit and offering mortgage loans to their customers. The interest on the saving deposited by the customers in the bank is high. In contrast, the interest on the mortgage loan availed by the customers is relatively lower as compared to the commercial banks and credit unions. The thrift banks are the form to offer their customers mortgage loan facilities and enable them to make savings from time to time. It also focuses on relieving the mortgage and lending markets from a monopoly of domestic or foreign banking institutes. These banks also functions to offer mortgage at lower costs and savings accounts that pay a higher rate of interest in comparison to national and international banking institutes. These banks functions in the best interest of the local people, and for this reason, they offer savings account and mortgage loans that could benefit the locals. Thrift banks is a type of financial institutes that specify in offering savings account and originating home mortgage for our customers. Thrift banks are also sometimes referred as a savings or a loan associations. Thrift banks differ from the larger commercial banks like Wells Fargo or Bank of America because they usually offer higher yields on savings account and provided in a limited lending service to the business. While a thrift core offering a traditional savings account and home loan origination, these institutes also offer checking accounts, personal and car loans, and credit cards for customers. However, they give primary attention to home financing for single-family residents. Thrift banks also are structured either as a corporate entities that are owned by their shareholders or they are mutually owned by their borrowers or depositors. Thrift banks also depository financial institutes whose primary function is promoting personal savings or thrift and home ownership through mortgage lending. Thrift banks or thrifts are financial institutes that have been set up with the express purpose of taking customers' deposits and lending. Ang thrift banks ay mas kilala bilang sa tawag na Savings and Loan Associations o asosasyon sa pag-impok at pagpapautang. Savings and Loan Association or thrift institution ay isang institusyong pinansyal na dalubhasa sa pagtanggap ng mga deposito at pagpapaimpok at paggawa ng mortgage at iba pang mga pautang. Na isang matipid na bangko na nakilala bilang isang samahan sa pagtitipid at pautang. Isang uri ng isang institusyong pampinansyal na nagbibigay ng mga pangunahing mga serbisyo sa pagbabangko sa pamamagitan ng pag-aalok ng iba't ibang mga pagpipilian sa pagtitipid at mga serbisyo sa pautang na mortgage at tulad ng mga komersyal na bangko na masyadong kwalipikado bilang isang deposito na institusyon at maaaring kahit na magbigay ng isang hanay ng iba pang mga produkto at serbisyo. Ang matipid na bangko ay nakakulong sa pag-alok ng mga deposito ng oras at mga account sa pagtitipid. Gayunpaman, sa pagbabago ng pag-uugali ng customers, mga kagustuhan, pangangailangan, at inaasahan, ang mga bangko na ito ay nagsimula mag-alok ng iba't ibang uri ng mga produkto at serbisyo na inaalok ang mga parehong mga komersyal na kumpanya ng banking at mga union na kredito.
Next is types of thrift banks. First is savings bank. This type of banks generate funds from the sale of saving deposits to the customers and investing the same in offering mortgage loans. Ito po yung mga financial institutions na tumatanggap ng mga savings deposits and ginagamit nila yung mga deposits na yon para ipautang sa iba para makakuha ng pondo. Next is private development bank. These types of banks are formed for supporting government policies. Just like the Development Bank of the Philippines, that is dedicated to nation building by assisting critical industries and sectors, promoting entrepreneurship, particularly in the countryside, helping build more productive communities, advancing environmental protection, and contributing to the improvement of lives of Filipino across the nation. Next is Tax Savings and Loan Associations. It is a locally or privately managed financial banking institution that takes long-term deposits into use for providing amortized home loans. Ito naman po yung type ng thrift banks na ang pinapautang nila or tinutulungan nila yung mga tao na magkaroon ng isang residential or private property. Pwede rin home improvements and new constructions. Example of thrift banks are Allied Savings Bank, City Savings Bank, Legazpi Savings Bank, Luzon Development Bank, EIB Savings Bank, LBS Development Bank, Liberty Savings Bank, and Isla Bank.
Rural banks. Rural banks in the Philippines. Government-sponsored assist. Banks that are privately managed and primarily privately owned that provide credit facilities to farmers and merchants, or cooperative of such farmers or merchants on acceptable terms, and to the inhabitants of the rural community in general. Micro, small, and medium enterprises is the process of completing financial transactions in areas where bank offices are too far away to be used. In June 1952, passage of Republic Act 722, which created rural banks in the Philippines. Rural banks is simply a banking service that serves smaller rural communities. They tend to be deeply embedded in the communities they serve. Rural banking traditionally have serviced the financial needs of people living in remote areas of the United States. Unlike banks located in more populous urban areas, rural banks may have relatively small and specialized customers base spread over a far greater geographical area. For example, include banks with an agricultural focus or those serving a small rural community. People living in rural areas need the same banking services as those living in the larger towns and cities. A community bank in a rural area might offer regular retail banking services, including loans and mortgage. They'll let personal and business customers manage their banking needs close to home, depending on their location and the local business focus. Some rural banks develop specialty commercial skills in areas such as agribusiness. For example, some operate solely within the farm credit system, a network of borrower-owned lending cooperatives, and specialized service organizations, specializing in business credit and funding for farming, ranching, and other agricultural customers. Rural banks are private unit banking institutions based in the rural areas which mobilize financial resources and control and extend credits to farmers, cottage, industrialists, and other rural-based economic operations in their defined area of operation. They have no branches but work through a network of agency and mobilization centers. The establishment of rural bank is expected to be initiated by people in the community where it is to be located. No external body is normally expected to initiate the opening of rural banks in a particular locality.
Good day, rural banks. The main objectives of these banks are to provide credit and other facilities, particularly to small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers, rural artisans, and small entrepreneurs so as to develop agriculture, trade, commerce, industry, and other productive activities in rural area. Next is, it plays a pivotal role in the economic development of the rural area. Means that it is crucial importance to have a rural bank in the sector of agricultural environment because when they need capital, it should be lent from any rural banks to make them prioritize their needs to grow their business. That's all. Thank you.
Rural banks. The main goal of establishing regional rural banks in India was to provide credit to the rural people who are not economically strong enough, especially the small and marginal farmers, artisans, agricultural laborers, and even small entrepreneurs. It means kung bakit merong rural banks, tinayo ang rural banks dahil nagpapautang siya sa mga taong hindi pa economically strong enough, kagaya ng small and marginal farmers, artisans, agricultural laborers, and mga small entrepreneur. Kumbaga, tinutulungan niya na pahiramin ng pera tas para mas gumanda yung ikot ng ekonomiya dun sa lugar na merong rural banks. And rural banking is simply a banking service that serves smaller rural communities. Next is, they tend to be deeply embedded in the communities they serve. Yun nga, tinutulungan nila na mas palaguin yung mga business sa small communities para mas lumawak, lumago. Then, sa kanila din yung balik nun. Mas lalawak palalo yung mga rural banks. Mas maraming rural banks. Mas aangat yung ekonomiya ng lugar na yun. These are the example of rural banks. Rural banks of Bolinao, Green Bank, Pen Bank, and QRCB.